I'm Steve Van Diemen, Absolute Custom Paint in Anaheim, California. The question I get asked most often is how to do ghost flames. Ghost flames are basically a graphic on a surface of a vehicle that can actually appear to disappear in certain light. Direct sunlight, they'll show up really bright. Sun starts going down and the shade actually has the illusion of disappearing. The way that I do that is with just a little bit of dry pearl in a clear, shot with a spray gun over any graphic. You can use, it doesn't have to be flames, it can be any sort of graphic, ghost images, whatever you want to call it. It's a really interesting effect. The reason that it's actually a real popular thing, some people want graphics on their vehicle, but they don't really want, they don't want you to see it from 10 miles away. They want it to be a little more subtle. So that's actually a good way to talk people into doing graphics that normally wouldn't do that. And another thing is, the best color to use ghost images on would be the darker the color, the better. We just happen to get a black truck, which is probably the best thing you can use. We have a 2003 Dodge Ram 500. The truck has already been prepped with 800 grit sandpaper, wet, masked off, wiped down, ready to spray. So let's go. Okay, first thing you want to do after the vehicle gets prepped, wipe it with a tack cloth to get any dust off. This is something that you're going to do pretty much the whole time you're working on it. Dust seems to come back even after you wipe it off, so keep a tack cloth handy. The next thing you want to do is take a Stabilo pencil and make a mark at the center of the hood. I usually start these jobs at the center of the hood that I'm working on. And take some 1/8" tape, and again, this is just regular masking tape as opposed to your blue tape. It's a lot cheaper, and it actually can stay on the car a little bit longer than blue tape can. Pull a straight line down the middle of the hood. Reason for that is I'm going to do a symmetrical design on this. After I've got a center line, just take the 1/8" tape and just start laying out your design. And sometimes you might put it down one time and love it, other times you might move it 50 times. Just depends. Notice when you're working on something quite large like this, you pull the tape out pretty far as you go. And just keep building your design as you go. Because this is going to be a ghost flame job, you don't have to worry about pinstriping, which saves you a little bit of money on paying a pinstriper, or saves you a little bit of time if you're going to do it yourself. But a fun thing to do to pinstripers when you're doing things like this is to bring your lines way up high on the hood so that they can't reach them, and then they complain. Because most pinstripers are really short. I don't know why that is. Another good thing about laying out designs like this is that once you get something that you like, you can have the owner of the vehicle come and take a look at the layout. It's essentially like almost just looking at a drawing, because especially on this, since it's a black vehicle, the tape's almost white, so he can actually see what it's going to look like before you even mask anything. And he can decide if he even likes it, because you never know, the guy might not like it, and you have to tear it all off and do it again. Another good thing about the tape being really cheap. Now you never know, I might lay this whole thing out and hate it and just take all the tape off and do it all over again. So I guess it pays to be kind of quick at it. And with this kind of tape, you can usually pull it up and put it back about 20 times before it won't stick anymore. Another good thing about this color of tape is you can see it underneath the masking paper really well when you go to mask it. It shows up perfectly against the black. One thing I try to do on this stuff is make sure that everything is proportionate. You don't want to really have a lot of really huge circles and then a lot of small circles that don't really look like they go together. Although you also don't want them all to be exactly the same. Then it looks like you used a stencil. Sometimes it looks like that anyway. And you just got to change it. People don't like stencils usually when they're paying for a paint job. Otherwise they just pay for stickers. And the best thing to do for learning how to lay out stuff like this is just practice on just any surface, glass, metal, whatever. Something hard, it's not going to move around. Another thing that I've seen people do that's a common mistake, I think a lot of times people are looking at the outside of the tape. for how big the flames are, you got to try and remember to look to the inside of those lines. That's how big your line is going to be, not the outside. A lot of times it's very deceiving. A lot of times you'll be laying these things out and you'll think you got these big, bold flames on these things, and then when you paint them, you peel all the tape off and you got these little tiny thin things going on. Which sometimes that's what people want. And if they want that, you give it to them. But we don't want that, so we're not giving that to them. Another good thing when you're working on a vehicle, a truck or a car, for instance, as opposed to working on a Harley, is notice right here, I've already started to bring this piece into the next panel right here. You want to start doing that as soon as possible so that you don't have these separations going on. You want it to look like it's flowing over the whole vehicle as opposed to making it look like they're just a bunch of separate pieces. Okay, that's just about the hood layout. Okay, now we're going to transfer the pattern. All I do is use a piece of 36-inch paper because this hood's pretty good size. Lay it off my center line that I made before and just tape it off. A couple pieces of 3/4. Doesn't really matter where you go to on that tape in the middle, so long as you do the same thing, go in the other direction. I usually like to go right to the middle of it. The most important part of your pattern is always going to be the hood. Okay, so what I use is just a lumber crayon. You can get these at Home Depot. They're about, I don't know, 50 cents each. And all you do is take it, rub it on top of the paper, and look what happens. Magical. And the bigger the crayon you got, the quicker it gives your pattern. You just rub it on top of the paper and make sure and get the 8-inch tape to show through. Just like that. Just make sure you don't miss any of it. As you roll over the curves, make sure you push it down as you go. Otherwise, you'll get double images. Next thing you want to do with this, make sure the paper's tight and get an edge mark to the edge of the hood like that, and that's pretty much your reference point for the rest of the pattern. Okay, now it's time to make a pattern out of your pattern. The way that I'm going to do that is use an electro-pounce machine. Basically what it does when you turn it on, it actually creates an arc of electricity. You can actually see it right here. One thing you definitely don't want to do with this thing is touch it, because it'll knock you on your ass. So you want to turn it off before you set it down. Now, one thing with the electro-pounce is you have to have a piece of metal on the other side of the paper in order for it to actually arc. Otherwise, it won't work. Best thing is a piece of steel. First thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut this line that I made for the edge of the hood for my reference mark. After this is cut, when you put it back on there, it should line up to the hood itself on the other side. It'll save a lot of time lining things up without having to measure anything. This way you don't really have to do it. Get rid of that. Other thing I like to do is cut all the excess paper off of it, make your pattern a little bit smaller. I'm going to take the pounce thing, turn it on. Remember, don't touch it. You can never say don't touch it enough, so I'll say that a lot. You notice on the pattern you can see the 1/8-inch tape. What I always do is I pounce to the inside of the line. And all you got to do is just run this along that line. And like I said, I always go to the inside of it. The reason I do that is because when I first started doing this, I guess I had to kind of decide whether I was going to go the inside or outside. And it kind of made sense to go the inside because where does your paint go? It actually goes to the inside of that line. It doesn't go to the outside of it. So you just keep following along like this. And it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect, just really close. Because especially when you're doing the hood, you do have the other tape on the other side laying down to where you can reference it and you can look at it. You don't have to keep walking back and forth like you do on the sides to check things. So as you can see, you can go pretty fast with this. Okay, one thing you definitely got to be careful of when you're using this thing is if you bring the wand a little bit too high, it'll burn a pretty big hole in the paper. I'll show you right here. You hold it up like that and it'll arc. It'll just burn a big hole in it and then you'll get too much chalk through there when you go to chalk the pattern. So what I always do is I put the wand straight down on the metal and it won't arc until you start moving. See that? Kind of neat. This is a hell of a lot faster than using one of those little pounce wheels. You can get one of these for around $200 to $300, but it'll pay for itself on the first job. So it's definitely worth it. Plus it makes a much smaller hole than a pounce wheel, so you get a little less chalk on the surface, which is good. And another thing is, since this is actually burning holes into the paper, the holes will always stay there as opposed to using a pounce wheel. You're punching holes through the paper and they can actually fill back up over time. If you save the pattern, and it'll clog back up. It's like a plug that's still there. Whereas this, there's nothing there, so it won't clog back up and last forever. And since it's making smaller holes, the paper won't tear as easily. With a pounce wheel, a lot of times the paper will tear because the holes are so large. The best thing about using one of these things is that your thumb doesn't hurt so bad when you're done with it. Anyone that's used a pounce wheel knows how that feels. Okay, another thing you want to do, notice there's a lot of red chalk on here. Not real important if you're working on a black vehicle, doesn't really show up that much, but it's not a bad idea to wipe the paper down before you go putting it on the vehicle. Otherwise you can transfer some of that chalk. It's really bad if you're working on a white vehicle. See, that's quite a bit of chalk that comes off. And if the vehicle was white, that would be all over it and you'd have a pink vehicle. Okay, now that you got your pattern made, turn it upside down, line it up off your marks. It's pretty easy to do. If you made a good pattern, it should line up without even really thinking too much about it. Just go to the middle of the tape like I've done already. Tape it down 2 or 3 places. Sometimes it'll get kind of a little kink to it, so you got to move it because you are working on a concave surface here, curving in more than one direction. So that's on there. Now I'm going to use a chalk bag. This is just a t-shirt filled with chalk, same thing you use for chalk lines in construction. Just pat it on the surface. You don't really need a whole lot of chalk. Just make sure you cover the whole pattern. I'll put a little more chalk on here than is really necessary so you can see it on film. Just remember there's more chalk to clean off. Now after that, just peel your paper off, and if you're lucky, you have a pattern. If not, you're going to have to repeat steps 1 and 2. There's your pattern. One thing that's important to do after you make and pounce your pattern is don't throw it away. Because if you do, and you need to go back and change something or fix something, then you're going to end up having to make a new one. Another thing you want to do is just blow off some of the excess chalk. Then all I do is come in, repeat step 1. Just come in with the 1/8 inch tape and follow along your chalk lines. And sometimes you have to adjust, especially when the lines are really close together. Just adjust it, make sure it's pretty much the same thing. Make sure you join up the center exactly where you want it to be, just like that. And just like before, you can always adjust things later. if you have to. And also make sure that when you're laying out the second part, make sure that you're not laying on top of the chalk. Because if you wipe the chalk off, you got to guess where everything was again. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to this side so I'm not laying on top of my chalk. And the way that I learned not to do that is because I did it once. And you just got to pounce the whole damn thing again. It's not much fun. When you're doing ghost flames, make sure your lines are all really clean because there's no pinstripe that's going to fix anything. So one thing I'll do before I go putting masking paper on anything right here I have a piece missing out of my pattern, so I got to add it in. I'll save that for last. You could either go in and re-pounce on the pattern and put it on, or you can just look at the other side and try and guess it. Just keep referring over to the other side to make sure things are the same distance, same length, same thickness, all that kind of stuff. The real trick to making curves with this 1/8 inch tape is, if you notice, I've always got the tape really low to the surface. That way you can get a really good curve because you're not fighting yourself as you're pulling these things around. If you've got the tape too high from the surface, it'll give you angles. If you're trying to hold the tape up high like this and you're coming around like this, see what happens? You're fighting with yourself. Keep the tape really low. You could do those curves real nice like that. Another thing, it's always a good idea to wash your hands quite a bit while you're working on these things. Last thing you want to do is have greasy fingerprints all over someone's paint job. And the worst thing is, a lot of times you won't see them until the clear coat goes on. And then after that, it's a little too late. So it's better to be safe than sorry on that note. So just notice keeping the tape really low to the surface. Keep referring back to the other side for things. Once you get closer to the middle, that's where it really, really matters. Gets really thin over here. I'm going to adjust this and make it match this side. Sometimes another thing is you'll do something on the new side with the pattern that you like a little bit better than the other side. You can go ahead and just come in and change the other side to match up with the new side. See, when you're doing this, assuming you have a flat surface, you want to keep the tape really low to the surface like this, to where it's almost touching the surface. The tape won't necessarily stick unless you push it down. You can pull it really low like this. You can see it'll catch once in a while, but for the most part, you can almost touch the surface as you come around. That's what gives you the real sleek curves. Another thing you definitely have to do is, as you pull it around and you figure out where you want this stuff to go, you need to push it down pretty hard. I'm putting quite a bit of pressure on the tape itself. Because if I don't, after you let go of it, it can actually separate and come off the surface. Notice how far out I pull this tape when I start out. That's just determined by how long of a line you're pulling. Sometimes you'll end up pulling a 20, 25-foot line on the side of something really big. You got to pull out a lot of tape. And if you screw up, you just wasted all that tape. Notice I keep wiping the surface, trying to get some of that chalk off. Sometimes what you do is just lay it out, just like you normally would. And then look at it and see if it looks okay with the other side. Probably have to change something. There really is no right-handed, left-handed thing on doing this. You use both at all times. There. And that's pretty much good to go. Grab your trusty tack cloth again, wipe off your chalk, just real lightly. Okay, now what we're going to do, take some Coast Airbrush Auto Mask, pull this out, go ahead, and we're going to mask the flames with this. It's a lot faster than using your traditional 3/4 inch masking tape. To the middle, get it right there, set it down, slightly push it down. Same thing as your pattern, you want to roll over the curves in the direction of the curve, otherwise you'll get a lot more wrinkles in it. Just like that. Take a squeegee like this, press down the paper, just like that. There you go. Just like that. Good. Okay. Okay, so now you got it all squeegeed down. What I use is an X-Acto knife with a number 11 blade in it. And for this purpose, you want to use a brand new, nice sharp blade. And your goal here is to cut along the top of the 1/8 inch tape, cutting through the masking paper, but not through the 1/8 inch tape. If you do cut through the 1/8 inch tape and into the paint, it's not going to hurt the paint, but a lot of times you'll be able to see little cut marks along your ghost flames. Now, if we weren't doing ghost flames, the little cut marks wouldn't make any difference because a pinstripe will cover that. But since we're doing ghost flames, you can't really have any cut marks, or at the least just minimize them to where you don't have a whole lot of them. Then you peel the paper up like that, you see some of the glue will stick up, it just wipes off. And that's what you want to end up with. If some of you are wondering how hard you're supposed to press down while you're cutting this stuff, basically the way you figure that out is you just got to do it, and preferably practice on something that's okay if you screw it up, because the only way to really figure out how hard you press down on it is just figure out for yourself. There really is no answer to that. If you're getting cut marks, then you're cutting too hard. So basically, you just kind of got to adjust as you go. One thing I learned to do is, if you notice, I peel it as I go, because I could probably cut this whole thing out and then turn around and peel it all. The problem with that is if you didn't cut it deep enough, you got to turn around and cut the whole thing all over again. But if you cut little pieces at a time and you feel like you didn't cut far enough, or if it's not peeling up good, then you know to adjust. Cut a little lighter or a little harder, just depending on what happens. Another thing that I pointed out before is that when I'm cutting these flames out with this knife, this is the same motion as pinstriping these flames. So it's in essence, you're practicing pinstriping while you're cutting these things out, believe it or not. If I was to take a pinstriping brush, I'd hold it pretty much the same way. And this is another thing where once these flames are peeled open, you can really start to see what they're going to look like. Because in this case, you've got white and then black, which is a good contrast to where you can really see what's going on. It's a little easier on the eyes than just looking at that, that beige tape sticking on that black surface. This way, really all you're seeing is black flames. Again, just cut through the paper and not through the 1/8 inch tape. Okay, another thing you definitely want to do is switch blades quite often. Have a new blade as much as possible. A nice new blade is going to be a lot better than using a dull blade, pushing harder. So I'm going to stop right there and grab myself another blade just to make sure. Fun with paper. Okay, in order to spray ghost flames, what you want to use is a straight dry pearl. House of Color makes a lot of really cool colors. What we're going to use on this truck, because it's black, we could use any color we want. We're going to use blue as a basis. We're going to use a little bit of purple in the hooks of the flames, which is the round part, with a little bit of white in the tips to make those jump out a little bit. Maybe a spot of white in the hooks as well. Give it a little bit of a 3D effect. The way that I mix the dry pearls is I use a little bit of SG100 clear, which is made by House of Color. Basically what this is a clear base coat. Dries extremely fast, dries just like base coat. You don't have to worry about things running so much. Be a little careful. Tends to dry extremely fast, and that's a good thing. Just thin it out with, I'm using RU311 today because it's a little bit on the temperate side. If it's cold, use the colder reducer. Hot, use the hotter reducer, so on and so forth. Mixing ratio is, for the SG100, is 2 parts paint to 1 part reducer. We're going to thin it out a little bit more. So it'll be about 1 to 1, basically. Because with ghost flames, you want it to be a little bit thinner so you can control it a little bit. Okay, usually what I do is the color that I'm going to use the most of, start first, the blue. It's always better to have too much than not enough. Just pour a little SG100 in there. Thin it out. Probably making way too much of this, but like I said, it's better to have too much than not enough. You don't want to start spraying it and have to come back and make paint. And also, how much you thin this is kind of up to you. I like it pretty thin. That way I can control it a little bit better. That's just me. And then make sure when you're going to mix the actual pearls, what I always do is smack it on the table, loosen it up. Sometimes this stuff will clump up like a dirt clod. And when you open it up, it'll be like a little more loose in there, which is good. Just kind of shake it up a little bit, and then just dump that directly into your clear. And just mix it up. And that's kind of what it looks like. Might be a little hard to see, but pearl in clear. Very nice. A little bit more. Depending on your customer, sometimes people don't want these things to show up really well. Sometimes they want them to really disappear. Other times people want them to show up very vibrant. It's impossible to make these things disappear completely. If you ever hear people tell you that they saw these flames that just completely disappeared, I haven't really seen that. Because if they completely disappear, that means they're not really there. So I always try to tell people that they're going to show up no matter what. So if they're looking for something to disappear completely, they better not do it. And it's probably not a good idea to spray it. Because once you spray this stuff on, you can't lessen how much there is on there. You can only put more. So I always make sure to just take one pass on the truck or car or whatever I'm spraying on and leave it at that. And that usually gives a good coverage. Just make sure you mix it up really good, as you can see, so there's no clumps in it. But there it is again. You can see how it reflects the light. But just how much you mix in with it is just preference. And what I would recommend would be experimenting on a panel or something like that before you go shooting on someone's car or truck or Harley or anything else for that matter. Use a piece of scrap metal. First thing I'm going to do is simply edge the entire design with the blue pearl. Make sure and only go around the actual edge of your mask, and that's what kind of gives the glow of the actual ghost flames. You don't want to fill the whole thing in, make it look like a sticker again. The amount of pressure that you use is definitely just preference of whoever's spraying. I like to use about 30 pounds of pressure for this. One thing that you may notice on film, it's very difficult to actually see the paint going down. It's actually harder when you're the one spraying it. You're essentially spraying blind. One thing you want to do is after you're done spraying, go around and inspect the whole thing. Make sure you didn't miss any spots. Good thing to do is have someone else come and look at it and look for spots that you missed. You could look over it 20 times and still miss a spot. Ghost flames are a very difficult thing to touch up if you did miss anything and you peel your graphic. You want to catch it before you peel your tape. Make sure and thoroughly strain the pearl after you mix it. Again, you don't want to get those clumps in your paint and have it spit out while you're spraying. We don't like spits. Okay, now I'm going to go in and use the violet. Hit the tips real lightly. Come in and just kind of just fade a little bit of the violet over. It'll give it a nice flip-flop effect from the blue to the violet. Same thing, keep the gun about 6 to 8 inches from the surface. Just go real slow. I usually have the gun open, wide open, and I pull the trigger back just very lightly. That way I can control the actual spray. Okay, now mixing up the alabaster white pearl. It's going to be my last color. Coming in with the white. Just very, very lightly hit the hooks of the flames. You don't want to put too much white on them. It's going to show up more than any other color. It'll give it a slight 3D effect. That's something that a lot of people don't really know how to do with ghost flames, ghost images. You can actually give a three-dimensional look to it just by using lighter and brighter colors. But you want to make sure and be very minimal with those colors. They'll overpower the design very easily. And there you have it. After you peel the tape, you should be able to see pearl on the edge. If you don't see pearl on the edge, you're going to have to put that tape back and spray that spot. And you don't want to feel any edge. If you sprayed right, nice and light and tight, you won't have an edge. Sometimes you may have a slight little edge buildup from your tape. All you got to do is just wipe that off. It'll come right off. So there you have it. Not as difficult as you thought. Good luck with your graphics. See you later. Till next time.